Now we come on to the defill, which is one of the more important components to get spot on for shape and size. Now the defill is essentially the arch support. So it needs to be in exactly the right position to support the arch. The high point needs to be in the right position, otherwise it could be very uncomfortable for the patient. And the slope, you can see that on there, is a nice smooth slope blending into the rest of the insole. So here we have, you can see the profile. It looks like the profile's here, but actually we're going to grind the profile underneath. So you can see the high point and a nice smooth slope down to the inside of the insole with a smooth transition. Now what we will see when we're marking them out and gluing them together, you will see here that this is the edge of the base, and the top edge, the outer edge, is actually further out than the base is. This is what we call the flange. So because to make this flange, we need to make the upper layers larger, so they'll then stick out over the edge of the base. And I'll be showing you that when we get to cutting them out. Here we have, so it's the defill. This is the completed defill. So to cut this out, the bottom layer, which would be the hardest layer, in this case 6mm PPT, is cut out the same size as the template. Find a nice area to put that. There we go. That'll do. Again, as always, a little bit of lumpiness isn't the end of the world. We can sort that all out in the grinding. But if you get the cutting as accurate as you can, that makes everything a lot easier. So that's the PPT, which is the same size. Now to get the flange, as you see, the pour-on is larger than the PPT. What we have to do is make the pour-on as much larger than the template as the whole thing is thick. So because we've got 6mm PPT and a layer of 6mm pour-on, 6 and 6, 12, which means the whole thing needs to be 12mm wider than this. And this is where the ruler comes in. So we add a little bit extra at each end. Put the ruler down, that's 12mm, move that out, and then draw around the outside edge. So you can see that the PPT will fit in with a nice 12mm overhang. This is probably the simplest and most common size, a 6 and 6. However, you may well find that some patients need a much thicker defill, 18mm or even bigger. Now what that means is the bottom layer will still be the same size as the template. The second layer, in this case pour-on, will be 12mm bigger. If this had another 6mm pour-on on top, then that one, because the whole thickness will be 18mm, the next layer will be 18mm bigger than the template, and therefore 6mm larger than this piece of pour-on, to give you a nice steady growth. The bigger it is, the wider it is. Now what we do is we glue these together before we do any machining, or we put the high point on. Now because this is the only common edge, you see this edge is bigger, we always line it up with what's going to be the outside edge. So this is the same common edge. If we had 4 or 5 layers, it doesn't really matter, they all line up with the same edge. So it's important to get that edge the same. And now we'll glue those together. So here we have the defill for gluing. So that's the way it's going to end up going together. So we need to open it up so we can glue the sides that go together. And as always, a nice thin layer, consistent layer all the way across. Because if you miss a piece and you grind through that area, you'll end up with a pocket, which A, looks bad, and B, may well cause the whole thing to fall apart. So we've got a nice layer all the way along. Now we leave that for 5 minutes to let the glue go off, and then we'll stick it together. So now 5 minutes has passed, and we take the bottom layer, line it, make sure it lines up with the outside edge, and just pop it down. Try not to to stretch it, because if you stretch it, it'll end up curling up, and it'll be more difficult to machine and more difficult to glue onto the base. So now we have the defill glued together. The next thing before we grind it is we need to locate the high point and mark it on. Now, in general, rule of thumb is the high point is 2/3 of the way down from the front to the back. So the way I do this, I use my finger and thumb, pop it on there, and you eyeball the distance between there and between the finger and thumb and from the thumb to the back end. And where the thumb is roughly 2/3 down. And then, because it's 12mm thick, we need to make the high point 12mm in. 12mm in from the outside edge is there. So there's the high point. Now what you will see is, because the pour-on is 12mm larger and the high point is 12mm in, what we're going to have when we glue this down is the high point on the outside edge of the insole and the 12mm of the rest of it sticking out the other side. And that gives us the meat we need to do the flange, which we've seen on the insole there. What you can do, if you want, is to mark the profile. If you mark the high point on, and if you think from the high point to the end, halfway along, you want to be roughly halfway through the material. So in this case, it's between the two. So halfway along is roughly there. So your profile line will go through that point there, like that. And the same with the front end. Halfway along is roughly there. You can measure it, but you don't need to. I find it's best to see the profile rather than have a line, because if you've drawn the line wrong and you grind to it, it's going to be wrong. So the profile should be correct rather than necessarily drawn on.
So just a quick comment in regards to the high point of any of the components that we're going to put on the medial aspect of the insole, such as the defiller or the whale or cobra. So when we look at the highest point, which is very, very important to mark, ideally what we need to do is when we actually take the prescription and we are in front of the patient, we should mark on the prescription this highest point, which anatomically should be the talonavicular joint. As you can see here, the highest point of the arch is the talonavicular joint. So as Rob said, ideally what you have to do is just divide the defiller in 3/3, and it will be the proximal third, the one that corresponds to the highest point. So just to give you an example of what it means, if you look at this whale here, before and after we've finished it, so this is the highest point, this is the highest point. So ideally that should coincide with that talonavicular joint, which will be the highest point of the arch, because otherwise if we put it too distal or too proximal, it will be uncomfortable for the patient. So that's a very, very important thing that we need to take in consideration. And as you can see here, everything from the highest point should just go gradually down to the distal and the proximal aspect of the component.
That's the finished thing. That's what we're going to end up with. A nice sharp edge all the way around, and a nice smooth profile up to the high point and back down to the end. So now we're going to make that from that. So here we are with the defill. We are cleaning up the outside edge that we've stuck together to make sure it lines up, gives us a good solid base. And now we're going to start doing the inside profile. First thing we'll do is put on a sharp edge all the way around the inside. That's very important to get a sharp edge for comfort, because if you think of it, the sharp edge sticking up is going to be right in the middle of the foot and be quite painful. So you can see here that I've got one hand holding it firmly and one hand underneath. The hand underneath is giving all the pressure onto the wheel. So I'm not pushing it into the wheel. I'm using my lower hand to help hold it onto the wheel to let the grinder do all the work. So when I've got a basic shape on one side, turn the component round, and you can then do the same on the other side. It's very easy to do. It's literally just changing a hold. It just makes it a lot easier, because you can't do the whole component holding onto one end, because your fingers get in the way. So here you can see there's the basic component. Now we look at putting the point profiles, the end profiles. Again, hand underneath, holding it into the grinder. As you can see, I've actually twisted the the component around slightly so I can see the outside edge, so I can see the profile as it develops. Very important in grinding. I'll reiterate this over and over. Make sure you know what part of the component is touching the grinder. If you don't know what part of the component is touching the grinder, you might be grinding the wrong bit. In this instance, you can see the profile developing. That's almost a good profile there. You've got a sharp edge on the top. It's just case you've just got to buff out all the sharp edges to make it a smooth profile. So here I'm doing the other end. You can see from both sides now. I haven't got my hand in the way. Again, it's my right hand there is underneath, giving all the pressure onto it. So none of the pressure is coming from my left hand. I'm not pushing it into the grinder. I'm just moving it up onto the grinder to let the grinder do all the work. And it does it quite efficiently. So here it's just a case of buffing it up, making sure I've got the sharp edge. Don't fixate on getting the sharp edge first. Try and grind the whole piece in one. So here you can see that I've almost got the profile done here. Just a little bit of a flat on one end. And it's just a case of buffing up all the little sharp edges, little high spots that you can see to get one smooth. If it's smooth underside, when you glue it down, it'll be smooth on top, and that's what we want in the end. So you see that's just about done. Just needs a few little bits of fettling.